We come now to what I believe is the most important world development since the founding of Christianity. Holland devoted the last few pages of chapter 12 to the emergence of an obscure college professor named Martin Luther. Luther had originally been bothered by the sale of indulgences and had posted 95 points to debate them and other doctrinal issues. Over time, Luther had concluded that the true Antichrist mentioned by Paul reigns in the court of Rome. Holland entitles chapter 13, Reformation, A.D. 1520. Luther continued to preach, write, and publish challenges to prevailing Roman Catholic dogma. Finally, he was summoned to appear before the emperor in the German city of Worms. Holland makes much of the role of Reformation in Christian history. Gregory VII had shaken the world to its foundations in the 11th century, and Luther was just one more in a long line of reformers. He was merely doing what many Christians before him had done. Holland recounts a number of major Protestant distinctives. Laity and clergy could not be viewed as separate spiritual entities, the folly of the celibacy and the necessity of salvation by grace alone. Finally, he appeals to conscience above all and refuses to recant when ordered by the emperor. The individual Christian's conscience took precedence over pope and council, as did the Bible. Holland then recounts some of the well-known adventures of Luther in the year following his meeting with the emperor. His kidnapping by Frederick, protective custody in Wartburg Castle, the translation of the New Testament into German. Luther's theological revolution, quote, had freed Christians everywhere to experience it as he had experienced it, as the means to hear God's living voice, end quote. Luther's Reformation had far-ranging consequences beyond what he could ever have imagined. There was the Peasants' Rebellion of 1525, led by apocalypticists like Thomas Müntzer, that killed 100,000 people. European states had to learn how to balance newfound spiritual freedoms with social control. The Lutheran states set about designing a model of the state that no longer ceded any sovereignty to Rome. Meanwhile, in the privacy of their souls, Christians had lost nothing. In place of church lawyers, they now had God. Meanwhile, in England, Henry VIII seized upon the Reformation to remove his country from the shackles of Rome and pursue his own marital agenda. On the continent, the Mennonites and the Amish arose, and this radical Reformation created more consternation for the heads of state. Over the centuries, many groups had never viewed the papacy as a legitimate authority. This supplied gunpowder to which Luther lit a fuse. In 1529, the Lutheran princes met at Augsburg in Germany to hammer out a way of governing in the midst of the new Reformation. They called themselves Protestants and laid the groundwork for a whole new way of operating nation-states in a post-papal age. The Protestant thinker who did more than anyone to resolve the tension between freedom and authority was John Calvin. Setting up shop in Geneva, Switzerland, Calvin wrestled with the practicalities of setting up a godly order. His only weapon was the pulpit. Refugees from all over Europe fled to Geneva to learn in Calvin's perfect school of Christ. Religious conflict broke out all over Europe. In England, the reign of Bloody Mary from 1553 to 1558 was followed by the peace of Elizabeth I. The Dutch suffered terribly for their Calvinism at the hands of the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor. The French destroyed their Protestant minority on St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572. And Scotland came over to the Reformation totally through the influence of John Knox. Finally, there arose a group called Puritans, called this by their Catholic enemies. They sought to purify the church from its Catholic influences. Once again, Holland points out the revolutionary nature of Christianity. Quote, "The rejection of tradition was itself a Christian tradition." End quote. A century on from Luther, Protestants could cast themselves as the heirs of a revolution that had transformed Christendom utterly. No longer merely a staging post in a lengthy process of Reformation, it was commemorated instead as an episode as unique as it had been convulsive. It was commemorated as the Reformation. Now there was a whole new world opened up. Quote, if God was to be found in the interior experience of individual believers, so also could he be apprehended in the immensity and complexity of the cosmos. End quote. And man's understanding of the cosmos was about to be revolutionized. The Protestant Reformation was a major dividing line in history. We now enter into what historians have called the Age of Modernity. The Middle Ages had ended, and a whole new world begun.